with the one-handed girl. An old couple once lived in a hut under a grove of palm trees, and they had one son and one daughter. They were all very happy together for many years, and then the father became very ill and felt he was going to die. He called his children to the place where he lay on the floor, for no one had any beds in that country, and said to his son, "I have no herds of cattle to give you, but only a few things here in the house, for I am a poor man, as you know. But choose, will you have my blessing or my property?" "Your property, certainly," answered the son, and his father nodded. "And you?" he asked the girl, who stood beside her brother. "I will have the blessing," she answered, and her father gave her much blessing. That night he died, and his son and daughter and wife mourned for 7 days and gave him a burial according to the custom of his people. But hardly was the time of mourning over than the mother was attacked by disease which was common in that country. "I'm going away from you," she said to her children in a faint voice. "But first, my son, choose what you will have, blessing or property." "Property, certainly," answered the son. "And you, my daughter?" "I will have the blessing," said the girl, and her mother gave her much blessing, and that night she died. When the days of mourning were ended, the brother bade his sister put outside the hut all that belonged to his father and mother. So the girl put them out, and he took them away, save only a small pot and a vessel in which the girl could clean the corn. But she had no corn to clean. She sat at home, sad and hungry, when a neighbor knocked at the door. "My pot is cooked by the fire. Lend me yours to cook my supper in, and I will give you a handful of corn in return." And the girl was glad, and that night she was able to have supper herself. The next day another woman borrowed her pot, and then another and another, for never were known so many accidents befall the village pots at the time. She soon grew quite fat with all the corn she had earned from the help of her pot. And then one evening she picked up a pumpkin seed in the corner and planted it near the well, and it sprang up and gave her many pumpkins. At last it happened that a youth from the village passed through the place where the girl's brother was, and the two met and talked. "What's the news there of my sister?" said the young man, who had assumed everything had gone badly, for he was idle. "She is fat and well-liking," replied the youth, "for the women borrow her mortar and clean their corn, and borrow her pot to cook it in, and for this they give her more food than she can eat." And he went away at this. Now the brother was filled with envy at the words of this man, and he set out at once, and before dawn he reached the hut, and saw the pot and the mortar were standing outside. He slung them over his shoulder and departed, pleased with his own cleverness. But when his sister awoke and sought for the pot to cook her corn for breakfast, she could find it nowhere. At length she said to herself, "Oh, some thief must have stolen them while I slept. I will go and see if any of the pumpkins are ripe." And indeed they were, so many that the tree had almost broken from the weight of them. Comment. So she ate what she wanted and took the others to the village and gave them in exchange for corn. The woman said that no pumpkins were as sweet as these, and that she was to bring every day all she had. In this way she earned more than she ever needed for herself, and soon was able to get another mortar cooking pot in exchange for her corn. Then she thought she was quite rich. Unluckily, someone else thought so too, and this was her brother's wife, who had heard all about the pumpkin tree, and sent her slave with a handful of grain to buy her a pumpkin. At first the girl told him that so few were left that she could not spare any. When she found that he belonged to her brother, she changed her mind and went out to the tree and gathered the largest and ripest there was. "Take this one," said she to the slave. "Carry it back with your mistress and tell her to keep the corn, as a pumpkin is a gift." The brother's wife was overjoyed at the sight of the fruit, and when she tasted it, she declared it was the nicest she had ever eaten. Indeed, all night she thought of nothing else, and in the early of the morning she called another slave, for she was, of course, a rich woman, and bade him to go and ask for another pumpkin. But the girl, who had just been out to look at her tree, told him that they were all eaten, so he went back in to hand it to his mistress. In the evening her husband returned from hunting a long way off, and found his wife in tears. "What's the matter?" he asked. "I sent a slave with some grain to your sister to buy some pumpkins. She would not sell me any. She told me there were none, though I know she lets other people buy them." "Well, never mind now. Go to sleep," he said. "Tomorrow I will go and pull up the pumpkin tree, and that will punish her for treating you so badly." So, before sunrise, he got up and set out for his sister's house, and found her cleaning some corn. "Why did you refuse to sell my wife a pumpkin yesterday when she wanted one?" he asked. "The old ones are finished, and the new ones are not yet come," answered the girl. "When her slave arrived 2 days ago, there were only 4 left, and I gave him one, and would take no corn for it." "I do not believe you. You have sold them to all other people. I shall go and cut down the pumpkins," cried her brother in a rage. "If you cut down the pumpkin, you shall cut off my hand with it," exclaimed the girl, running up to the tree and catching hold of it. But her brother followed, and with one blow cut off the pumpkin, and her hand too. Then he went into the house and took away everything he could find, and sold the house to a friend of his who had long wished to have it, and his sister had no home to go to. Meanwhile, she had bathed her arm carefully, and bound it on some healing leaves that grew nearby, and wrapped a cloth around the leaves, and she went to hide in the forest, that her brother might not find her again. For 7 days she wandered about, eating only the fruit that hung from the trees above her, and every night she climbed up and tucked herself safely among the creepers, which bound together so big branches, so that neither lions nor tigers nor panthers might get to her. When she woke up on the 7th morning, she saw from her perch smoke coming up from the little town on the edge of the forest. The sight of huts made her feel more lonely and helpless than before. She longed desperately for a draught of milk from a gourd, for there were no streams in that part. She was very thirsty. But how can she earn anything with only one hand? This thought her courage failed, and she began to cry bitterly. It happened that the king's son had come out from the town very early to shoot birds, and when the sun grew hot, he felt tired. "I will lie here and rest under this tree," he said to his attendants. "You can go and shoot instead, and I will just have the slave to stay with me." Away they went, and the young man fell asleep, and slept very long. Suddenly he was awakened by something wet and salt falling on his face. "What is that? Is it raining?" he said to the slave. "Go and look." "No, master, it is not raining," answered the slave. "Then climb up the tree and see what it is." And the slave climbed up and came back and told his master that a beautiful girl was sitting up there, and that she must have been her tears which fell on the face of the king's son. "Why is she crying?" inquired the prince. "I cannot tell. I did not dare to ask her, but perhaps she would tell you." And the master, greatly wondering, climbed up the tree. "What is the matter with you?" he said gently, and as she only sobbed louder, he continued, "Are you a woman or a spirit of the woods?" "I am a woman," she answered slowly, wiping her eyes with the leaf and creeper that hung next to her. "Then why do you cry?" he persisted. "I have many things to cry for," she replied, "more than you could ever guess." "Come home with me," said the prince. "It is not very far. Come home to my father and mother. I am a king's son." "Then why are you here?" she said, opening her eyes and staring at him. "Once every month I and my friends shoot birds in the forest," he answered. "But I was tired and bade them to leave me to rest. And you, what are you doing up in this tree?" At that she began to cry again, and told the king's son all that had befallen her since the death of her mother. "I cannot come down with you, for I do not like anyone to see me," she ended with a sob. "Oh, I will manage that," said the king's son, and swinging himself to a lower branch, he bade his slave go quickly to town, and bring back with him 4 strong men, and a curtain leader. When the man was gone, the girl climbed down and hid herself on the ground in some bushes. Very soon the slave returned with the litter, which was placed on the ground close to the bushes where the girl lay. "Now, all of you go and call my attendants, for I do not wish to stay here any longer," he said to the men. And as soon as they were out of the sight, he bade the girl get into the litter and fasten the curtains tightly. Then he got on the other side and waited till his attendants came up. "What is the matter, O King of the Sun?" they asked breathlessly and running. "I think I am ill. I am cold," he said, and saying to the bearers, he drew the curtains and was carried through the forest right inside his little house. "Tell my father and mother that I have a fever and that I want some gruel," he said, "and bid them send it quickly." So the slave hastened to the king's palace and gave his message, which troubled both the king and queen greatly. A pot of hot gruel was instantly prepared and carried over to the sick man. As soon as the council which was sitting was over, the king and his ministers went to pay him a visit, bearing a message from the queen that she would follow a little later. Now the prince had pretended to be ill in order to soften his parents' hearts, and the next day he declared he felt better, and getting into his litter was carried to the palace in state, drums being beaten all the way along. He dismounted at the foot of the steps and walked up, a great parasol being held over his head by a slave. Then he entered the cool, dark room where his father and mother were sitting, and said to them, "I saw a girl yesterday in the forest whom I wished to marry, and, unknown to my attendants, I brought her back to the house and let her. Give me your consent, I beg, for no other woman pleases me as well, even though she has but one hand." Of course, the king and queen would have preferred their daughter-in-law with two hands, and no one would have thought riches with her, but they could not bear to say no to their son. So they told him he should be as close, and that the wedding feast should be prepared immediately. The girl could scarcely believe her good fortune, and in gratitude all the kindness shown to her, she was useful and pleasant to her husband's parents, that they soon loved her. By and by a baby was born to her, and soon after that the prince was sent on a journey by his father to visit some distant town of the kingdom, to set things right that had gone wrong. No sooner had he started than the girl's brother, who had wasted all his riches his wife had brought him in this reckless folly, and was very poor, chanced to come into town, and as he passed he heard a man say, "Did you know the king's son has married a woman who has lost one of her hands?" On hearing these words, the brother stopped and asked, "Where did he find such a woman?" "In the forest," answered the man, and the cruel brother guessed at once it must be his sister. A great rage took possession of his soul, and he thought of the girl whom he tried to ruin being so much better off than himself, and he vowed that he would work her ill. Therefore, that very afternoon, he made his way to the palace and asked to see the king. When he was admitted to his presence, he knelt down and touched the ground with his forehead, and the king bade him stand up and tell wherefore he had come. "By the kindness of your heart you have been deceived, O king," said he. "Your son has married a girl who lost the hand. Do you know why she has lost it? She was a witch, and she has wed 3 husbands, and each husband has been put to death by her arts. Then the people of the town cut off her hand and turned her into the forest. And what I say is true, and her town is also my own." The king listened, and his face grew dark. Luckily, he had a hasty temper and did not stop for reason, and instead of sending to town to discover the people that knew his daughter-in-law, he could have been told how hard she had worked and how poor she had been. He believed all her brother's lying words, and made the queen believe them too. Together they took counsel what they should do, and in the end they decided that they would put her out of the town. But this did not content her brother. "Kill her," he said. "It is no more than she deserves for daring marry the king's son, and she can do no more hurt to anyone." "We cannot kill her," he said. "If we did, our son would assuredly kill us. Let us do as others did, and put her out of the town." And with this envious brother was forced to be content. The poor girl loved her husband very much, but just as then the baby was more to her than all else in the world, and as long as she had him with her, she did not mind much of anything. So, taking her son in her arm and hanging the little earthen pot around her neck, she left her house, and with its great peacock fans and slaves and seats of ivory, plunged back into the forest. For a while she walked, not knowing whither she went, and then by and by she grew tired, and sat under a tree to hush her baby to sleep. Suddenly she raised her eyes and saw a snake wriggling from under the bushes towards her. "I am a dead woman," she said to herself, and stayed quite still, for indeed she was too frightened to move. In another minute the snake had reached her side, and to her surprise he spoke. "Open your earthen pot and let me in. Save me from the sun. I will save you from rain." And she opened the pot, and when the snake had slipped in, she put on the cover. Soon she beheld another snake coming after the other one. And when it reached her, it stopped and said, "Did you see a small gray snake pass this way just now?" "Yes," she answered. "It was going very quickly." "Ah, I must hurry and catch it up," replied the second snake, and it hastened on. When it was out of sight, the voice from the pot said, "Uncover me." And she lifted the lid, and the little snake slid rapidly to the ground. "I'm safe now," it said, "but tell me, where are you going?" "I cannot tell you, for I do not know," she answered. "I am just wandering in the wood." "Follow me and let us go home together," said the snake. And the girl followed him through the forest along the green path till they came to a great lake, where they stopped to rest. "The sun is hot," said the snake, "and you have walked far. Take your baby and bathe in that cool place where the boughs of the trees stretched far over the water." "Yes, I will," answered she, and they went in. The baby splashed and cried with delight, and when he gave a spring and fell right in, down, 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 his mother could not find him, though she searched among the reeds. Full of terror, she made her way back to the bank and called to the snake, "My baby is gone. He is drowned. I shall never see him again." "Go in once more," said the snake. "Feel everywhere, even amongst the trees that have their roots in the water, lest perhaps he may be held fast there." Swiftly she went back and felt everywhere with her whole hand, even putting her fingers into the tiniest crannies, where a crab could have hardly taken a shelter. "No, he is not there," she cried. "How am I to live without him?" But the snake took no notice, and only answered, "Put in your other arm too." "What is the use of that," she asked, "when it has no hand to feel with?" But all the same, she did as she was bid. In an instant the wounded arm touched something soft and round, lying between stones and a clump of reeds. "My baby! My baby!" She shouted and lifted him up, merry and laughing, and did not a bit hurt or frightened. "Have you found him this time?" said the snake. Oh, yes, she answered. "And why, I've got my hand back again." And for this sheer joy burst into tears. The snake let her weep for a little while. Then he said, "Now we will journey on to my family, and they will all repay you for your kindness you have showed me." "You have done more than enough in giving me back my hand," replied the girl. The snake only smiled. "Be quick, lest the sun should set," he answered, and began to wriggle along so fast that the girl could hardly follow it. By and by they arrived at the house in a tree where the snake lived, when he was not traveling with his mother and father. And he told them all his adventures, and how he had escaped from his enemy. The father and mother snake did not do enough to show their gratitude. They made their guest lie down in a hammock woven of the strong creepers which hung from bough to bough, till she was quite rested after her wanderings, while they watched the baby and gave him milk to drink from the coconuts, which they persuaded their friends, the monkeys, to crack for them. They even managed to carry small fruit tied up in their tails for the baby's mother, who felt at last that she was safe and at peace. Not that she forgot her husband, for she often thought of him and longed to show him their son. In the night she would sometimes lie awake and wonder where he was. In this manner, many weeks passed by. And what was the prince doing? Well, he had fallen very ill when he was on the furthest border of the kingdom, and he was nursed by some kind people who did not know who he was, so that the king and queen heard nothing about him. When he was better, he made his way slowly home again, and into his father's palace, where he found a strange man standing among the throne in peacock feathers. This was his wife's brother, whom the king had taken into high favor, though of course the prince was quite ignorant of what had happened. For a moment the king and queen stared at their son, as if he had been unknown to them. He had grown so thin and weak during his illness that his shoulders were bowed like those of an old man. "Have you forgotten me so soon?" he asked. At the sound of his voice they gave a cry and ran towards him, and poured out questions as to what happened and why he looked like that, but the prince did not answer any of them. "How's my wife?" he said, and there was a pause. Then the queen replied, "She is dead." "Dead," he repeated, stepping a little backwards. "And my child?" "He is dead too." The young man stood silent. Then he said, "Show me their graves." At these words the king, who had been feeling rather uncomfortable, took heart again, for he had prepared 2 beautiful tombs for his son to see, so that he might never guess what he had done to his wife. All these months the king and queen had been telling each other how good and merciful they had been to not take her brother's advice and put her to death. But now this somehow did not seem certain. Then the king led the way around the courtyard, just behind the palace, and through the gate into a beautiful garden where stood 2 splendid tombs in a green space under the trees. The prince advanced alone and rested his head against a stone, and he burst into tears. His father and mother stood silently behind, with a curious pang in their souls which they could not quite understand. Could it be that they were ashamed of themselves? But after a while the prince turned around, and walking past them into the palace, he bade the slaves bring him mourning. For 7 days he saw no one, but at the end of them he went out hunting, and helped his father rule his people as before. Only no one dared to speak to him about his wife and son. One last morning, after the girl had been lying awake all night thinking of her husband, she said to her friend the snake, "You have all shown me such kindness, but now I am well again and want to go home and hear some news of my husband, and if he still mourns for me." Now the heart of the snake was sad at her words, but he only said, "Yes, this must go. Yes, thus it must be. Go and bid farewell to my mother and father, but if they offer you a present, see that you take nothing but my father's ring and my mother's casket." So she went to the parent snakes, who wept bitterly at the thought of losing her, and offered her gold and jewels, as much as she could carry in remembrance of them. But the girl shook her head and pushed the shining heap away from her. "I shall never forget you, ever," she said in a broken voice. "But the only tokens I will accept from you are the little ring and this old casket." The 2 snakes looked at each other in dismay. The ring and the casket were the only things they did not want her to have. Then, after a short pause, they spoke. "Why do you want the ring and casket so much? Who has told you of them?" "Oh, nobody. It's just my fancy," she answered. But the old snakes shook their heads and replied, "Not so. It is our son who told you, and as he said, so it must be. If you need food, clothes, or a house, tell the ring and it will find them for you. If you are unhappy or in danger, to the casket, and it will set things right." Then they both gave her their blessing, and she picked up her baby and went her way. She walked for a long time, till at length she came upon a town where her husband and his father dwelt. Here she stopped under a grove of palm trees and told the ring that she wanted a house. "'Tis ready, mistress," answered a queer little voice, which made her jump and look behind her. She saw a lovely palace made of the finest wood, and a row of slaves with tall fans bowing before the door. Glad indeed she was to enter, for she was very tired, and after eating a good supper of fruit and milk, she found one of the rooms, and she flung herself down on a pile of cushions and went to sleep with her baby beside her. Here she stayed quietly, and every day the baby grew taller and stronger, and very soon he could run and even talk. Of course, the neighbors had a great deal to say about the house, which had been built so very quickly on the outskirts of town, and invented all kinds of stories about the rich lady who lived in it. But now, by and by, when the king returned with his son from the wars, some of these tales had reached his ears. "It is really very odd about that house under the palms," he said to the queen. "I must find out something about the lady whom no one ever sees. I dare say it is not a lady at all, but a gang of conspirators who want to get possession of my throne. Tomorrow I shall take my son and my chief ministers and insist on getting inside." Soon after sunrise the next day, the prince's wife was standing on a little hill behind the house, and she saw a cloud of dust coming through the town. A moment afterwards she heard faintly the roll of drums that announced the king's presence, and saw a crowd of people approaching the grove of palms. Her heart beat fast. Could her husband be among them? In any case, they must not discover her there, so just bidding the ring prepare some food for them, she ran inside and bound a veil of golden gauze around her head and face. Then, taking the child's hand, she went to the door and waited. In a few minutes the whole procession came up, and she stepped forward and begged them to come in and rest. "Willingly," answered the king. "First go, and we will follow you." They followed her into a long dark room, in which was a table covered with gold cups and baskets filled with dates and coconuts and all kinds of ripe yellow fruits. And the king and the prince sat upon the cushions and were served by slaves, while the ministers, among whom she recognized her brother, stood behind. "I owe all my misery to him," she said to herself. "From the first he has hated me." But outwardly she showed nothing, and when the king asked her what news there was in town, she only answered, "You have ridden far. Eat first and drink, for you must be hungry and thirsty, and then I will tell you my news." "You speak sense," answered the king, and silence prevailed for some time longer. Then he said, "Now, lady, I have finished and am refreshed. Therefore tell me, I pray you, who you are and whence you come. But first, be seated." She bowed her head and sat down on a big scarlet cushion, drawing her little boy, who was asleep in a corner, onto her knee, and began to tell the story of her life. As her brother listened, he would fain have left the house and hidden himself in the forest, but it was his duty to wave the fan of peacock feathers over the king's head and keep off the flies, and he knew he would be seized by the royal guards if he tried to desert his post. He must stay where he was. There was no help for it, and luckily for him, the king was much too interested in the tale to notice the fan was ceasing movement, and that the flies were dancing right in the top of his thick curly hair. The story went on, but the storyteller never once looked at the prince, even through her veil, though the side he was on never moved his eyes from her. When she reached the part where she had been weeping in the tree, the king's son could restrain himself no longer. "It is my wife," he cried, springing to where she sat with the sleeping child in her lap. "They have lied to me, and you are not dead after all, and nor the boy either. But what has happened? Why did they lie to me? And why did you leave the house where you were safe?" And he turned and looked fiercely at his father. "Let me finish my tale first. Then you will know," answered she, throwing back her veil. And she told how her brother had come to the palace and accused her of being a witch, and had tried to persuade the king to slay her. "But he could not do that," she answered. "After all, if I stayed in your house, I should have never met the snake, nor have got my hand back again. So let us forget about all that, and be happy once more. For see, your son is grown quite a big boy." "What shall be done with your brother?" asked the king, who was glad to think that someone had acted in this manner worse than himself.
"Put him out of the town,"
answered she.